Now, before anyone jumps in the comments saying, Alan, you're taking Max out of context. No, I'm not. I've linked the podcast below. Go listen for yourself. What I'm doing here is I'm simply analysing his words and giving my view on the implications of them when you consider them in detail. I'm just expanding on what he said. I'd love to sit down with Max and ask him some questions to further explore his thoughts, but that's not going to happen anytime soon. So here's Max Verstappen's recent comments on the Pelas Pistas podcast with Nelsinho Piquet, Christian Fittipaldi and Tiago Alves. Now, this should be required listening for anyone involved in the governance and promotion of kart racing at any level. So here's what went down. The presenters asked Max a hypothetical. If a driver has a year off in F2 and must choose between karts or sims, what should they do? Now, Max initially said both, but this wasn't the actual question. The question was if you had to pick one or the other. So he was forced to pick. And this is what he said. No, forget go-kart. Okay, that's what he said. Now, of course, he explained and went into a bit more detail. So after saying that, he said, that's the problem with our sport. I think a little bit is that, when you grow up playing football, you play from a young age with the ball and the ball doesn't change. Okay, when you're a kid, the goals change, but after that, it's the same. For us, I feel like go-kart is not the same as a race car. Go-kart, you learn the basics of racing, starts, defending, overtaking, but the go-kart does not handle like a kart. I mean, you already sit completely different, you have suspension, the go-kart always has to slide, right? Because you have the axle, so it always needs to be free and it always needs to slide. A car is the opposite because the car, for me, always needs to be stuck on the rear. And of course, then you try to take as much front end as you can, but in general, the rear needs to be stuck. So the whole driving dynamic is very different. So then I would always say go to the sim. Yeah, I mean, go-kart a little bit for fun, but not as proper practice. I mean, I haven't driven a proper go-kart since 2016. One thing, right? Do you ever notice how drivers, when they leave karting and go to karts, they suddenly start calling it go-karting? Like, guys, this karting. Bit weird, isn't it? He then continued and said, go-karting is fine. I mean, it's very good to learn as a kid, but at one point, that's done. You need to forget about it. So when Max says something like karting is fine, in my opinion, it exposes something at the core of karting's current malaise. The reason karting generates grids and generates new people into the sport, pretty much the only reason, bar the odd exception, is because there is no viable alternative for kids. If there ever was, it's pretty much game over for karting because its current business model is almost entirely based on this. Think about it for a moment. Karting isn't the theoretical optimum option for a parent trying to teach their kid how to drive with an eye on car racing. Max literally says that's the problem with our sport. Now, sure, he doesn't totally dismiss karting. Later on in the podcast, he recommends drivers do a year of KZ before cars, but he's hardly what you'd consider a big advocate for karting like, say, Schumacher and Senna were. There isn't an acknowledgement that the path from karting to cars is not fundamentally ideal when we're discussing the dynamics of the vehicle here. And this is what really gets me, and this is kind of what I wanted to say. The FIA barely mentions Senna Van Wilstein's World Championship, if you look at their Facebook pages and so on. The actual karting achievements at the highest level of the sport. But what do they promote instead? Their new and arriving Drive Championship, and now they've announced this new F4 test for FIA karting champions. And Van Wilstein, he just dominated the SKUSA Supernats with a world-class drive. What he and Sodi Kart are doing right now is truly amazing, right? Yet the framing of karting as the stepping stone means he and his rivals don't even get a hundredth of the respect and admiration they deserve. This to me is sort of criminal. The only upside here is Kart Chaser's superb coverage of the Supernats this year, and I think they've done some record numbers, so hats off to those guys. But how the sport is treated by the major international governing bodies, like the FIA, and this is what I mean when I say the Formula 5ing of karting, is that they promote it almost exclusively as a stepping stone, a feeder series, and to me, that's kind of a betrayal of the sport. And the thing about grassroots and stepping stones, what they have in common, they get walked over. If you actually spend 5 minutes looking into karting history, you'll learn that the basis of karting's enormous success in the early years was that it was a great way to go racing, full stop. Very little was made of transferability to cars, and one of the reasons was because the sport was primarily adult-oriented. Think about the numbers for a second here. Reports at the time, and this is like 1960, put the number of karts sold around 100,000 in North America. That's just 3 or 4 years after the kart was invented. If karting was promoted back then like it is today, as nothing more than a stepping stone to cars, I highly doubt a company like Bug would have been able to produce the 250 to 300 karts a day that they were doing at the height of their production. The prospect of car racing and the associated costs would have buried karting very quickly, in my view. This stepping stone ideology did eventually infect the sport, but it was not the primary driver of the sport, nowhere near. And why do I know this? Well, because I've just released a new book. Ta-da! Karting Sagas, Forgotten Stories from the Sport's Golden Age. Now available on Amazon. The book brings to life the era when the sport was young, wild, and completely its own. We're talking about the punishing Tecate 100-miler, the otherworldly Bottomless Lakes Grand Prix near Roswell, indoor stadium spectaculars, road legal karts, spectacular street races, World Championship glories, and stand mots around the world in a kart adventure. These are the tales of eccentrics, engineers, and entrepreneurs who built karting not as a preparation for something else, but as a motorsport in its purest and most glorious form. If you love karting, motorsport history, or tales of sporting pioneers, I've got the link down below if you want to buy it. Yes, thank you. Now, back to Max. He said that he hasn't driven a car since 2016, pretty much since he started in F1. And when asked if he misses it, his answer is quite telling. He says, not at the moment, maybe later, but for now I enjoy going out in the GT car. His sort of final word on all of this pretty much was, forget about karting. Now this is from the mouth of one of the finest drivers karting's ever produced. He never mentioned any of the legends of karting, the likes of Ardigo, Thonon, Lammers. It's pretty much just forget about it, right? And just for a slight detour for a second, because what I've always found particularly interesting and overlooked about Max is how he actually went karting. His dad took their karts home and tuned the engines. He actually says this in the podcast. While he was actually part of the CRG factory team, Max and Jos operated as a true team themselves when they won the World Championship, hands-on together, working on the karts themselves. And it's this core component almost every wealthy parent misses today in the FIA karting scene. They send their kids off to race in Europe like it's a boarding school, throwing money at the teams. The way karting is sold today doesn't even reflect the reality of how Max succeeded in it and what developed him into such a monster driver. So what exactly is being learned at these events? The FIA seem obsessed with this arrive and drive nonsense, and yet how Max did it, how what should be considered probably the best driver we've ever seen, his way of doing it has been completely ignored or forgotten, and it's sort of dismissed, which I find quite extraordinary. Now, I want to be very clear here. What I'm saying here isn't a slight against Max. He remains the best driver I've ever seen in a car. What makes Max such a compelling character is his brutal honesty. Some drivers feel compelled to lavish praise on karting in some vain attempt at loyalty. Max doesn't bother with that at all. He's a bigger advocate for sim racing than he is for karting, and there's nothing wrong with that. I happen to think his words are the best thing everybody in the sport needs to hear right now, because it should be a wake-up call. If karting is to truly flourish again, it cannot rely on a model that even its so-called greatest success story uses phrases like the problem with. The sport faces a simple choice. You can continue down the stepping stone path and watch the decline accelerate, or we can rediscover what made it so successful in the first place, what made it the greatest motorsport to have ever existed. Not a training ground, not a feeder series. There can be no success found in the Formula 5ing of karting. Now, there are sparks of life out there. Paolo Di Conto recently told Vroom that he was in favour of free development in the top class. It would be great to see races of the highest level and performances, rightly superior to the category designed for newcomers with a gearbox, KZ2. Think about what he's saying here. He wants a true top class, not a junior category pretending to be elite, not a stepping stone with delusions of grandeur, but actual pinnacle level karting. Well, Paolo, if you want to see that top class emerge truly, then karting and its drivers need to establish they see themselves as worthy of such status. That means a strong repudiation of the continual onslaught of stepping stone ideology. Otherwise, there's no motivation, no will to change the current trend and direction of the sport. Unfortunately, I'm not going to hold my breath. But to conclude, Max Verstappen has made his position very clear. Karting's establishment should be listening. I doubt they will. I think the truth is now that top flight karting would benefit if something like the GP/KCA came back and we went back to the original World Championship competition before the FIA had theirs. Yes, the FIA weren't the first to have a World Karting Championship. I think a new approach to the sport is desperately needed if we want to see karting thrive as a singular motorsport again. However, karting might not be strong enough to do this, but alas, one can dream. Now, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this, so comment all you want down below. And yes, I hope I've made my views very clear here. I'm doing my best not to take Max out of context. I'm just merely expanding on the words that he used. Thank you for watching. And yes, remember my books on Amazon right now. And also check out my Substack, alandove.substack.com, if you want to see some of my musings in writing form. Bye.